I just heard a fresh air interview on NPR with Miranda July, the author of All Fours. They were mostly talking about her work in a Peep show, and I'm not one for sex shame or shaming sex workers. I think, for instance, by comparison, there's a story last night about the French hero who's turning the shame around on the people who deserve shame instead of victims of crimes. But it's not the same thing in the sex work industry. I think if there was no shame there, then um, it would be a bigger industry. There would be less shame for people working in it and less shame for patrons and customers of it. I don't think that the shame should be turned from the people who do the work to the consumers. I think the shame should be turned to the people who shame sex in the first place. And we should escape all this patriarchy and evil sex shame. Now, in this interview, it was interesting that there's still a taboo about this because it meant that this is what she was asking about the most. It makes me think Terry Gross, the interviewer, has surely talked to many, many feminists, and maybe feminist herself, and there was still this like salaciousness or allure of talking about her work in a Peep show, because it's interesting, really, ultimately, because it made for good conversation. She said one more question, and Miranda July went on for a little while answering the question, because it was interesting to hear. But it was just also interesting the tone of the way they talked about it, as if, this is supposed to be hush hush, but we're talking about it anyway because it's taboo. And I guess the first thing she said is she didn't make a lot of money at it, but she made enough money at it that she didn't have to work longer hours so she could write her book. Makes me think, if I had a job that some people consider to be morally questionable but doesn't hurt anybody at all, and it allowed me to work less hours so I could write more, that'd be great. I'd love that. And she didn't seem to feel shame for doing it, but then again, she didn't seem to be proud of doing it either. She mentioned that it was, to her, just a job that she didn't like, just a crappy job. And Terry Gross, the interviewer, asks her, did you find some way to see it as performance art? And she said, no, it was just a crappy job. But then she finished that off by saying then she went to work for Papa Lock. After she left that job, she went helping people break into their cars when they locked themselves out. And that was even worse, or that she didn't like that job at all, that was a much worse job because she had a beeper and she had to be called at all hours and things like that. So put it in context. But then she asked her the one more question, I guess what she observed of the men observing her. And she said one of the things that stood out, she said, was that she could play In Your Eyes, the Peter Gabriel song. She called it a Genesis song, but that's forgivable. It's the same thing. Peter Gabriel song, In Your Eyes, that would give them the masculine experience they were looking for, or that was the perfect peak experience. So I'm assuming this was in the 80s or 90s maybe, but and she said the other song she would play was Brown Eyed Girl, and that would give them a really amazing experience as well, the homie experience or next girl next door experience or something like that. And again, I don't know how, it wasn't like there was a comment card where she got this information. It's just a feeling she got, or maybe the feeling she was projecting on them, whatever that was, but something she observed. I thought it was interesting that those were related to popular songs at the time, and that she referred to that when asked the question. Then the last thing she asked her was what her book meant to people and what the biggest response from her book was. And she said it was that everybody said she's writing down their own private thoughts. And I don't guess everybody who read it and responded to it and, would approach the author about such a thing would say such a thing because they would relate to it. Maybe everybody does relate to it, which as a writer I think would be kind of amazing. I've always thought the things I write, I'm looking for someone who can relate to them instead of expecting everyone on the planet to relate to them or everyone in certain circumstances to relate to them. But anyway, so it sounds like a good book, sounds like a good writer, but I really just wanted to comment on the way sex shame makes this the most interesting part of the conversation, or the meat of the conversation that I heard anyway, and yet something that we could get over and do better for changing the way we feel about it. Again, I think people would still make a lot of money in these industries. It's not like the industries are only lucrative or even partly lucrative compared to regular wage work. Because of the taboo, they're probably only dangerous because of the taboo. If the things were more out in the open, they wouldn't be as dangerous. But I think they'd still be very lucrative if, as a society, we put the shame on the patriarchy and the people who create sex shame and allowed people to feel liberated about sex and sex work, so that there'd be more people willing to do it and feel better about doing it, and more people willing to consume and participate, patronize that type of work and feel better about that as well. And I would think that would reduce the negative possibilities where people commit crimes and abuses because they don't have a healthy outlet for this. And providing healthy outlets for sexuality and reducing sex shame, as far as I can tell from all the crimes I hear about, it seems like those criminal motivations would be reduced and there would be less people driven crazy by patriarchy and sex shame. Thank you.